so glad you're here. What a week. I mean, yesterday we were on this stage with President Clinton, a beautiful celebration of Governor and Mrs. Winter's lives. Thanked Haley Barbour for his role in building these museums. And I was standing right here. This is the first time I've been in the room since then. And at the end, President Clinton, we were supposed to leave after the first verse of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And you're supposed to, this is new to me, so I'm told you do what the president does. So he stayed on the stage and was singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And so we all stayed up here, and I was able to see everybody's expressions. And I saw on Medgar Evers' daughter, Rena, a tear coming down her eye, and right behind her, Marsha Barber, a tear coming down her eye. And it wasn't sadness. It was just a beautiful moment in the room when things come together. And I'm still processing it. And if you didn't get a chance to see it, if y'all are in the room or if y'all are streaming it, do yourself a favor and go watch it. You can stream it off our website or find it on our YouTube channel. It doesn't get any better than yesterday. And the week continues. All-Star Week, here continues. Today we have a special program with my friend Jere Nash. I introduced Governor Barbour yesterday, and I was thinking about it. Jere Nash and Haley Barbour have a lot in common. They're from the Delta. They love Mississippi. Super smart. They married up. Y'all know that. Is Holly Wagner here? On her way, okay. She's an all-star, too, and you know it, and she's part of her family, and she has raised money and brought people in and is a team builder, for the building of the museum and yesterday with the endowment. She's something else. She could do a history's lunch for sure. I think, all right, shifting gears to today, I learned from both Jerry and Holly. I'm looking forward to today's program, and I just want to be brief about that and talk about what a week we have. And the staff here is running on all cylinders, and with Holly Lang, and the week continues. And I'm going to introduce Katie Blount, our executive director, who's an all-star in state government and leads an agency that works tirelessly, and we have a fun week ahead. Today's going to be fantastic, and we've got some other things I'll ask her to talk about. So, Katie, if you come up, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Spence. Okay, so back to President Clinton. I was in charge of getting him off the stage after the first verse of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And behind me was Holly Lang and the president's assistant back there behind that screen, frantically trying to get me to do that. And I tried, and the president first just kind of ignored me because he was listening to the music, and then he said, "Why do they want me to leave? I can't leave. I've got people to see here. Where's Beverly Hogan?" I'm Katie Blount, Director of the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Fund, Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation of Mississippi. We are in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the two Mississippi museums. If you have not already done so, please silence your phones. As Spence said, we're in the middle of a busy and exciting stretch of events that began with Eddie Glaud's magnificent Evers lecture last week, and then yesterday's historic celebration of the lives of William and Elise Winter. This Saturday, we'll open the new exhibit, The World of Marty Stewart, which highlights Marty's amazing artifact collection, stuff you've never seen, from original Hank Williams manuscripts, costumes from Porter Wagner and Dolly Parton, Merle Haggard guitar, Pop Staples guitar, Johnny Cash's first black performance suit, and much, much more. You will be stunned. On Friday, our Friday night Marty party is full, but we have plenty of room for everybody at Saturday's Mississippi Makers Fest, a free day-long celebration of the state's music, food, and art out here on Entergy Plaza from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Stop by. You can find all the details on our website and musical lineups. Thank you, Spence, for thanking our staff. We have the best staff in state government, and with all of these events happening one on top of the other, they're really happy with me right now, but they are showing what they're made of. Please help me thank them. I hope you'll come back next Wednesday for History's Lunch when our friend Jody Skipper from the University of Mississippi will discuss her new book, Behind the Big House: Reconciling Slavery, Race, and Heritage in the U.S. South. And for today's program, back in March, we held a History's Lunch program with members of the legislative leadership. They talked about the closing days of the session when momentum grew for the state flag change. Speaker Philip Gunn recounted moving conversations with legislators who had promised their constituents that they would not vote to change the flag, but who were now grappling with being on the wrong side of history. They thought about their faith, their families, their legacy, and Speaker Gunn talked very candidly about those conversations. The program was extraordinary, one of the best we've had. I invite you to watch it on YouTube or Facebook if you missed it. Today, you'll hear more about those pivotal days from Jere Nash, who wrote a long, penetrating, and thoroughly researched article in the Journal of Mississippi History about the flag transition, taking readers behind the scenes at the Mississippi Capitol in late June of 2020. No one else could have written this article. Nash has the connections, the credibility, the perspective, and most important, the ability to write clearly and powerfully about complicated events. Published a couple of weeks ago, the article has been a smash hit. Every day I hear from legislators who want extra copies. I want to thank Brother Rogers, the managing editor of the journal, who guided the issue to publication, and Emma McCraney, who is responsible for its beautiful design. Here it is, only 2022, and the Journal of Mississippi has adopted color photography. Nash's article is paired with a shorter piece I wrote about MDAH's work supporting the Mississippi Flag Commission, which was established by the legislature to select a new flag for ratification by voters. I described the commission's work during the summer of 2020, COVID summer, emphasizing the care commissioners took with their work and the attention they paid to the public input as the legislature had directed. There was tremendous public interest in the process. More than 3,000 new flag designs were submitted. Thousands of people watched the meetings online, commenting on social media, and selecting their favorites through a poll on our website. The process was public, transparent, and compelling. I believe the commissioners' genuine engagement of the people's will contributed to the overwhelming vote in favor of the new flag in the November election. All Mississippians owe a debt to the commissioners for their dedication and their leadership. We have two commissioners with us here today. T.J. Taylor, who was appointed by Speaker Philip Gunn, Commissioner Mac Varner from Vicksburg, who was appointed by Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. Thank y'all for what you did. Am I missing any flag commissioners? I don't think so. Is Judge Anderson here? Judge Anderson, you're here in disguise. I want to thank them all for their dedication and leadership, especially Chairman Reuben Anderson, who spoke movingly at the final meeting about what the flag change meant to him personally and to the state. It was a magnificent speech, and you should watch it. It's on our website. I think about it a lot. The flag transition is one of the more fascinating and important chapters in Mississippi history, and I am grateful to Jere Nash for writing an authoritative chronicle of it for the Journal of Mississippi History. Nash was campaign manager, director of policy, and chief of staff for former Mississippi Governor Ray Mabus, and is co-founder of the Mississippi Book Festival and president of its board of directors. The Book Festival has quickly become a major event in the book world, nationally, a tremendous asset for our state, and my favorite day of the year. Thank you, Jerry, Holly. We have a number of Ellen, Stewart, Peyton. Thank you all so much for the Mississippi Book Festival. Jere Nash is co-author of America's Great Storm, Leading Through Hurricane Katrina, with former Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, and of Mississippi Politics, The Struggle for Power, 1976 to 2008, and Mississippi Fried Politics, Tall Tales from the Back Room, both with Andy Taggart. He is at work on a history of Reconstruction in Mississippi. Since easing out of the political world, Jere Nash has become an important voice in chronicling the history of this state. He was one of the scholars we turned to for help, along with Stuart Rockoff and a number of others, with the text for the exhibits here at the two Mississippi museums. He offered many incisive observations, but my favorite was this comment on some pompous pronouncement about the inexorability of change. Nash wrote, "Needless to say, this is bullshit." We took it out. Jere Nash is a great friend of this department and a great person. Thank you very much for being here today. Please help me welcome Jere Nash.
Y'all hear me? I rarely use one of these things. I thought walking over here that it might be fun, depending on how you set up the audience, that I've learned so much about how the legislature changed the flag, or at least passed the bill, that I thought it might be fun to have, I could do a little role play. Y'all have been to those occasions where actors and actresses sort of dress up as the actual characters, and you sort of let yourself slip into a role play. And I thought, well, you know, I could just be Briggs Hobson, standing here telling you what Briggs was thinking as he was delivering his speech. Then I could be Philip Gunn, sitting in the back, standing in the back, thinking about what was going through his mind. Then I remembered Chris Goodwin is live streaming this thing, and that I would like to continue living. But I did that once. I let myself become absorbed into one of those character sketches. Some of you may remember several years ago, the Mississippi Historical Society had their annual meeting in Corinth to talk about Reconstruction. And the feature event, they had characters dressed up as Abraham Lincoln, General Grant, and Frederick Douglass. And they put on a performance on the stage at some venue in Corinth. And the next morning, we all met at a park that had been redone by the Park Service to commemorate a part of the Reconstruction history that's in Corinth. It was a gorgeous day, blue sky, sidewalk. We were walking along, and apparently somebody had told Abraham Lincoln that I was writing a history of Reconstruction. And I mean, the guy looked just like Lincoln. He was tall, had the hat on, the beard, the suit, and I'm sort of walking along, and he ambles up next to me and begins talking to me like it's 1863. And I thought, all right, am I going to do this? And I said, okay. So I became the great senator from Massachusetts, Charles Sumner, and we began to talk about what Reconstruction would look like after the war. This was obviously after Gettysburg and Vicksburg. Everybody knew what was going to happen. The question was how long. And he was keeping right up there with me the whole time. We were in great detail about what Reconstruction would look like in Congress. And we were walking along, and then he put his arm around me, just like you would expect a president, a floor leader, putting your arm around me. And I thought, okay, I have to take this in. This will be the only time in my life that a Republican politician will put his arm around me. And it was great. It was great. So before I begin, I want to say a word about our sponsor. The bill that the legislature passed that last Sunday in June of 2020 had a number of provisions. Section 5 repealed the state law that had authorized the flag. Another section created a commission to design a flag. Another section required that the old flag be properly retired. There were lots of other provisions. The legislature could have given those responsibilities to any number of agencies. They could have divided it up. They gave every bit of it to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. And I think it is a testament and a signal to the way in which archives and history is viewed at the state legislature. And think about this. Many of those Republican legislators had already put their careers on the line with the vote that they cast. But they had no idea what a new flag was going to look like. They had no idea what an election was going to look like. They were essentially saying, we are sort of letting you determine our future. Because if the flag is not accurate, if there's not a statewide consensus on a flag, if the election goes down, then that will hurt us in a re-election campaign. And they trusted the Department of Archives and History to do it right because they had done it right in a number of other ways. And of course, 72% in November of 2020 is hard to argue with. So if you want to give Katie and her team here a round of applause for a job well done, they certainly deserve it. So think about this. There are 3 million people who live in Mississippi. And as the Friday before the Memorial Day weekend 2 years ago was sort of beginning, as these 3 million Mississippians were leaning back, getting ready for a long weekend, enjoying a drink, not one of the 3 million Mississippians leaned back and thought out loud, you know, in 30 days, Mississippi is going to have a new state flag. Not one. Yet 30 days later, on June the 27th, more than 2/3 of the Mississippi legislature voted to suspend their rules to allow for the introduction of a bill to change the flag. That bill passed by an even greater percentage the next day. 2 days later, Governor Reeves signed that bill. And on July the 1st, for the last time in history, the 1894 flag was taken down and delivered to the Museum of Mississippi History. It's an extraordinary achievement. And make no mistake, this was not a quid pro quo bill. It didn't say, if a new flag is adopted, the 1894 flag will be repealed. This bill exclusively and specifically repealed the 1894 flag. They didn't know if Mississippi was going to have a new flag, but the 1894 flag was going to be history. Not only did the bill repeal that statute, it said, and the commission shall not use the Confederate battle flag in a new flag. And in these interviews that I conducted with legislators, I said, you know, did y'all ever think about making it a little bit easier of a vote? I mean, did you think about making it a quid pro quo so that it wasn't so explicit? And every one of them said, if we do nothing in this 3 weeks, we're going to get rid of that flag. And they got rid of it. And it was an extraordinary achievement on July 1st, 2020. 3 or 4 days later, I get a call from my writing partner and friend, Andy Taggart, who says, Nash, why don't you come out to my office? I have a project for you. So I make my way out there, and this is Andy's idea. He said, what they've done is so extraordinary that we need to record it for history, and that we need to interview people who participated in this event at the legislature and get it on tape. We may never be able to use it, but at least future historians will have it. And if we're able to write about it, that's great. But at least we will preserve history for future historians, because we knew we had done our first book based on 110 interviews. And I can assure you that memories fade over time. And so Andy said, we got to go get it done now. And so we made a list of about 10 or 15 legislators who we thought we should go interview. And then we both looked at each other and we said, you know, if Philip Gunn and Delbert Hosemann are not with us, then this is all for naught. So Andy agreed to call the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor and see if they would buy into this. They enthusiastically bought into it, said they would sit for interviews, and said that they would talk to their members. So my first interview with Philip Gunn, and y'all are going to have to excuse me, the older I get, my throat gets dry, and I have to take these lozenges. I sat with Philip Gunn for 4 hours, and all of my interviews were with open-ended questions. I wanted to know, how did this get started? What was the momentum? Who was involved? And I asked Philip Gunn, when was the first time that somebody came and talked to you about changing the flag? And that's when he told me about the meeting with Robert Johnson, Shonda Yates, and Chris Bell, who came to him after they had just left the meeting with 4 Republican representatives. And they said, we think it's worth trying to change the flag in June of 2020. So that meant my next interview was with Robert Johnson, a state representative from Natchez, chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. And another open-ended question that I ask of people, can't find my glasses. Another open-ended question I ask of people was, it was usually my first question. When did you realize that the flag had to be changed? When did it become an issue for you personally? Was it an event? Was it a conversation? What was it that made you think, we've got to change that flag? Robert Johnson gave me his answer at the beginning of our interview. And I listened to him talk, and I knew that I didn't know what I was going to write, what kind of article was going to come out of this, but what he told me in that interview was going to end my article. And this is what he told me. When asked the first time he became aware of the Confederate battle flag, Representative Robert Johnson recalled an event many years earlier. When I was 5 years old, I went with my family to my first Christmas parade. This was 1963 in downtown Natchez. White folks were on one side of Main Street, and my family and other black folks were on the other side. At the end of the parade, after Santa Claus, came 15 to 20 Klansmen, all on horseback, waving their Confederate flags. The whites were cheering while all of us on our side were very quiet. Even as a child, I understood the chilling effect of that flag. Everyone knew what it stood for. You know, I never thought I'd live to see the day that the state flag would be changed. Never did. But in the days leading up to the vote, many of my white colleagues began to understand and respect what I'd been feeling for 61 years of my life. And that's why I think it changed. Philip Gunn, I asked him, I said, when was the first conversation you had with somebody in the Senate? And he told me about an early conversation with Briggs Hobson, senator from Vicksburg, chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So that was an early interview, and I went and talked to Briggs Hobson. And he said, you know, we did have that conversation, but the first conversation I had with someone about changing the flag in the Senate was with Bryce Wiggins, because Bryce had put up on his Facebook page, a senator from Pascagoula, Bryce had put up on his Facebook page a vote that first weekend in June asking people to choose between the 1894 flag and the Stennis flag. And the results came back 4-1 in favor of the Stennis flag. The very next day, Bryce showed up in the state Senate, ran down to the bottom floor where Leah Ruff Smith had her office, Deputy Chief of Staff to Delbert Hoseman, looked across the desk, pulled out a list of the senators and said, "Leah, I think we can do this." And they went and talked to Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hoseman, and that began the effort in the Senate. And on the House side, that small effort that began with that early meeting grew into something very, very large. And so we conducted these interviews and we recorded this history. And we were going to do 10 to 15 interviews, and I ended up doing 72 of them. 42 of those were recorded on tape and will be preserved for history. I have more than 100 hours of interviews with 42 people who were instrumental in making this effort happen. Along with my notes and results of other interviews, all of that will be given to the Department of Archives and History, and at some point in the future will be available to future historians. But then I had to resolve Andy's other proposal, which was to write something. And here we came up with something that I thought was great. That when I sat for an interview with someone and turned on the tape recorder, I said, "Here's the deal I'm going to make with you, Philip Gunn, Trey Lamar, Jason White, Bryce Wiggins, Briggs Hobson, and all the rest of them I interviewed. Here's the deal I'm going to make with you. I want you to be completely honest with me in this interview. And then I'm going to write something, but in return for you telling me everything that you know, we're going to let you look at the article we write and approve it and edit it and give us feedback so that we're going to be able to write what you think you can let us say publicly in 2022 versus what future historians will have down the road to explore this issue even in more detail." So when I came to see Brother Rogers several months ago with the article that we had written, it was not an article written by Jere Nash. It was a written article by Jere Nash with 65 other co-authors. Because almost everyone I interviewed read the article or read pieces of it that involved them. And it was a great process. Not one person asked me to delete anything. In fact, reading the article jogged their memories, and they told me other stuff that I needed to add. They had nuanced observations about the way in which I wrote something, and they had me change it to give it a much more, a better meaning. I could impart the information in a way that made sense to these legislators. And those interviews and those comments sort of all came together in the article that I delivered to Brother several months ago. Well, Brother took the article and sent it to Dennis Mitchell, the editor of the Journal, and the two of them got together and came up with this idea of doing a special issue of the flag for the Journal of Mississippi History. Katie Blount generously agreed to write an article about the work of the commission, which is a great piece of history in describing how the new flag came to be. And once they agreed to turn this into a special issue, I then could do what I really wanted to do, which was to put the votes in there. So we've recorded for all time the three key legislative votes that last weekend in June of 2020. The vote to suspend the rules, I probably bet that. Is that okay? Yeah. The vote to suspend the rules, the vote that Sunday on the actual legislation, and then the vote the next January after the flag was approved in the November 2020 referendum, the legislature came back in January of 2021, and House Bill 1 passed in 3 or 4 days, taking that new flag and putting it into law. And so those are the 3 votes. They're in the back as an appendix, recorded for all time. And Brother and Dennis worked the article over and made a bunch of great edits. As they normally do with the Journal of Mississippi History, they send it to an anonymous peer reviewer, I suspect a real historian, who came back with 3 really good edits or changes that I should make, which I did, and improved the article a whole lot. Other people read it. I think Brother asked Elbert Hilliard to read it over, and he offered some wonderful edits. And so the article you have here in the journal now is up to about 75 co-authors. And it is much, much better than some of the earlier drafts that I did without anyone's help. And by and large, I think captures what happened inside that building during the last 3 weeks in June. It represents 50% of what I know. The other 50% is recorded for history on those tapes that some future historian will have a lot of fun going through and comparing all of the tapes and all of the notes with what we were able to publish this in May of this year. But almost all of the tactical decisions that were being made in the Capitol are recorded here. I think only 2 or 3 tactical decisions we're going to save for future historians. But what I just have so much on tape are personal histories and personal responses of individual legislators, staff members, lobbyists, other people who were involved, who recounted personal experiences that led to their vote, that led to conversations with other legislators. And that's going to make for some great history when it eventually comes out and other people can write about it. So that brings us to how in the world did it happen? But before I do that, since we're all right here, does anybody want to ask a question about how this thing got published? Or do you want me to keep going? Keep going. All right, well, I got to have another lozenge. All right. So, as every one of you know, in the Mississippi Legislature, it is all about timing. All about timing. So think about this. In a regular year, the Mississippi Legislature would not even have been in session in June of 2020. The regular session would have ended in March. They would have gone home, never to come back. The only reason they were there in June of 2020 is because of the pandemic. They adjourned in March, scheduled to come back at the end of May. And of course, the other thing that opened the door for change at the Capitol was the incredible response to the murder of George Floyd. It wasn't one demonstration or 10 demonstrations. It was thousands of demonstrations all over the state, all over the country, all over the world, really. Millions of people participating in demonstrations and in conversations for a sustained period of time like the country had not seen in a long time. And that opened the door for the change. But to help sort of clarify how this happened, let's compare the 2001 state legislature with the 2020 state legislature. The 2001 state legislature is the legislature that passed the bill that created the 2001 referendum on the 1894 flag. It came after the Supreme Court decision that said Mississippi does not have a legal flag. And what's clear in hindsight is that neither the legislature nor the state were ready to grapple with that issue. You might remember this is just 2 years after Robert Kyatt at Ole Miss had done away with the Confederate flags at football games. I still don't think white folks have recovered from that. But they clearly had not recovered from it in 2001. So they introduced a bill in early 2001 to require a public referendum. Not one white legislator was willing to risk their career and vote against that bill. It passed the House with only one dissenting vote, passed the Senate with 7 or 8 dissenting votes. In 2001, not one white legislator, almost all Democrats, were willing to put their careers at risk and vote against that bill or push for a bill that would change a flag. They just put it up on the ballot. Over the ensuing 20 years, things began to happen that changed people's opinions statewide. It all began, I think, in 2014 when Lauren Stennis produced her flag, in 2015 when Philip Gunn made his statement in support of a new flag, the growth and strength of the Black Lives Matter movement in response to the violence that was being done all over the country began to change hearts and minds. And people began to be willing to accept the possibility of a new state flag. And then, of course, George Floyd happened and the legislature happened to be in session. And in the end, I think Andy captured the reason why it passed in the legislature. I interviewed him for this book, this article. At first he was going to be a co-author, but it became clear in conversations with legislators and with others that Andy had played an instrumental part in this movement over time, and so I needed to include him in this article and not have him as a co-author. So I asked him, he was making a bunch of calls that last week, particularly in the Senate, and I asked him, why did he think that it passed? And this is what he said. Not one senator wanted to keep the old flag. The hurdle was the 2001 referendum. Could they back up from a promise made in the campaign to let people vote on any change? In the end, I think enough of them realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment that they needed to take. The work that everyone did that 3 weeks in leading up to that vote, the last weekend of the session, was not done to change people's minds. The minds were already changed. What all of that work and effort did was give legislators the support they needed to cast that vote, knowing that just a year earlier in an election campaign, they had promised voters the right to vote on this. And they were essentially, a lot of them were reneging on a promise, which we should not take lightly. We should not take lightly promises made by politicians and people asking them to change their mind. And for that reason, it was a very tough vote. But in the end, they all began to see that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. All of these thousands of individuals and organizations were going to be there to help them in a re-election campaign. And then as my friend T.J. Taylor over here will say, I hope you will corroborate me on this, toward the end of that week, it began to develop a sense that we don't care, that this is something we're going to do for the state. And elections didn't matter. And it will probably be the only time in somebody's experience that they would see that. You should not underestimate what happened. And it was all personal relationships that got it done. Constituents, lobbyists, university presidents, preachers, friends, family that got it done. It was personal relationships that swung the day. And it was pretty remarkable in the end. I had the privilege to talk to him about it. I had the privilege to sit across the table from him and hear him talk about it. And it was pretty remarkable to have them talk about it and to have them understand what they had done. And you shouldn't take it lightly, what that flag meant and what it means that it came down. Something to be proud of and to celebrate. And brother, I'm thankful that you and Dennis gave me the opportunity to publish this and to write about it and that we can record it. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I wanted to leave you with some good news. Mississippi is not last in the flag business, in the sense of the Confederacy being ingrained in a state's flag. There's still 4 states that have elements of the Confederacy in their state flags. The first is Arkansas. Now, beside being the ugliest flag of any state in the country, this flag was adopted in 1913 without that star on the top of Arkansas. The flag that was adopted in 1913 had the stars around, which signified whichever number the state was when Arkansas became a state. And the 3 stars in the bottom represent the 3 countries that Arkansas had been a part of: France, Spain, and the United States. In 1924, they amended their flag to put that top star on there. And you know what the top star meant. The Confederacy, the Confederate States of America. That top star signifies that they're proud of being part of the CSA. It's even uglier than it was. Here's the second ugliest flag in the world. This is Alabama's flag, which was adopted the year after the Mississippi flag in 1894. This flag was adopted in 1895. And I don't have to tell you what they used as a basis for that flag. And it is still the one that they fly today, that flag right there, which of course used as its framework the old Confederate battle flag. Here's Florida. Same thing, adopted in 1900. But when it was first adopted, they had the Great Seal in the middle of a white background. And the governor around 1900 thought, when he saw it flying somewhere, all he could see was the white. And he thought it went to the flag of the surrender flag. And he said, guys, we can't have a state flag be the surrender flag. Of course, they did surrender, but anyway. So they looked at what Alabama had, and they did that. Of course, it meant even more surrender, but, you know, when you're in the middle of the lost cause in Jim Crow, none of it makes sense. But this is my favorite. This is the new Georgia flag. Y'all may remember, Georgia used to have the Confederate battle flag as a part of its flag. And back in 2003, 2001, Roy Barnes was governor, made an effort to get rid of the Confederate battle flag, came up with another flag, which was actually defeated in a referendum Sonny Perdue got elected governor in 2003, 2004 on the platform of coming up with a new flag. They created a commission. This is the flag they came up with. Now, look what it resembles. Y'all know what this is. This is the first national flag of the Confederate States of America. You see any semblance? In fact, Sonny Perdue was very explicit that we needed to somehow honor the CSA, so why don't we use the first national flag of the Confederacy? But I like this even more. Of course, you know that the number of stars there are 13, the number of members of the Confederacy. And of course, here there are 13 stars. What we don't know is if it represents the 13 original colonies, of which Georgia was one, or if it represents the 13 states and rump delegations that represent the Confederacy. But here's ours. And it is clearly something to be proud of. And I tell you what's really good about it. What's really good about it. This little star here at the top of the Arkansas flag, which represents the CSA being proud members of the Confederacy. You know what that gold star stands for? Represents the people who were here long before our ancestors were here. And it represents something very, very positive. That there were people here working the land thousands of years before our ancestors got here. And we should honor that. And we do honor that with that gold star. Is Judge Anderson still here? Golly, you are in disguise. Look at that. Y'all should thank him and the other members of the commission for coming up with this. 72% is a hell of a deal at the ballot box. And that night, you could hear a huge collective sigh of relief among the legislators who voted to let the Department of Archives and History do this. And they did a great job. The commission did a great job. The voters of Mississippi did a great job, and your legislature did a great job, and it's something to be proud of. Thank you. We have, I guess, 10 minutes.
If anyone has a question.
I could keep talking all day long, but I'm happy to answer questions.
One in the back.
You recounted the childhood inspiration for one of the leading black legislators who was part of getting this done. In your interviews, when you asked this question of white legislators, did any of them, and if so, what proportion of them, also when asked about when they first noticed something about this flag that disturbed them or that they understood to be disturbing, did any of them go back to childhood?
Well, I am limited by what I can say because of the deal that we made in the interviews that we conducted. I asked that of every legislator who I spoke with, and I don't know that any of them had an early childhood experience like Robert Johnson did. A number of them had experiences in high school. A number of them had experiences as an adult. I am all messed up here. The one that I did print in here, which I'm going to see if I can find on page 30, was one that Briggs Hobson told me, which he let me put in here when I asked him about experiences that he had had. When I was in the Senate, I had a group of high school students I was recognizing for an accomplishment, and we went out to the balcony to take a picture. We were standing between the American flag and the Mississippi flag. They asked if we could move over a little bit, and that stuck with me. It was an African-American group of students, and they asked if they could just move a little bit over. They didn't make a big deal about it. They didn't say why, but it didn't take me long to figure out the reason they wanted to move over and get to a different place was that they didn't want to stand by the state flag and have it appear in the photo. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of that. There were 2 or 3 pretty horrific instances that white legislators recounted to me when they were in their teens that they witnessed happening in their local hometowns that gave them pause. Yeah. Yes, sir. Well, I know you. Good to see you, buddy.
Hang on, let me get you the mic so everybody watching the video can hear your question as well as the answer.
Jerry, you mentioned things that came together to cause this vote to happen. And part of that were a lot of organizations and individuals that gave cover to the legislator.
Right.
Was there any 1 or 2 or 3 that you felt were more important than others?
Well, again, I can only tell you what they told me. The spark that started it was the decisions by the SEC and the NCAA to issue their statements that Thursday and Friday back to back, which led to a tweet by Representative Trey Lamar sort of beginning to set the stage for the last week in June. But just as many legislators, and again, I'm asking open-ended questions. What was it that motivated you? When did you get a sense that the tide was turning? When was there an opening? And for many of them, they said it was that Tuesday when Philip Gunn and Delbert Hosemann hosted all of the religious leaders at the MC College School of Law. And they talked about the important roles that the religious leaders played with legislators and encouraged them to reach out. Of course, what I discovered in doing all the interviews is that the religious leaders were way ahead of Philip Gunn and Delbert Hosemann, had already started organizing, had already made an effort at energizing their base, had already made the decision to get involved. I had such a, if anybody here wants to spend time, have lunch with 2 great guys, and just sit down and talk about race, you couldn't find 2 more interesting people to do that with than Sean Parker and Ligon Duncan. Sean Parker, who's director of the Mississippi Baptist Convention, Ligon Duncan, who runs the, which seminary? Reformed Theological Seminary for Presbyterians. I'm sitting across the table with Sean Parker and just, we spent 2 hours talking about this stuff. It was remarkable. And it was painful for him because he caught a lot of flack. And he sort of leaned back and he thought, Jerry, pastors are called to love people. And we made a lot of people mad at what we did. But pastors are also called to be prophetic. And we wanted to be prophetic and Jesus-like in our statement. Very strong, very strong. But more people mentioned that Tuesday afternoon, that's really what, as one legislator said that I quoted in the article, that's when the thing got legs. Yeah.
Jerry, the thing that gets to me is the contrast between what happened in that vote and a few years earlier when there were some public hearings on the flag, and William Winter was up in front of those and got the hell beat out of him by those people who were in support of the old Confederacy. And I mean, it was really awful, ugly stuff.
Right.
I remember being in that room and, getting the shakes. And how that changed just strikes me.
Well, it was 20 years. I mean, those hearings were held in the fall of 2000, which led to the legislature adopting the referendum in 2001. I drove out to Canton. This is terrible. Where's that? Where am I? Maybe I can recite this. I drove out to Canton to interview Ed Blackman, state representative, who was both on the commission that Rems is talking about, and also authored the bill that January in 2001 to require a referendum. And I asked Representative Blackman why that was, why they did that. And he said, we all concluded a vote was the only way out. No white legislator wanted to put himself through what William Winter had endured. No one wanted to be ostracized within their own community. It was that serious. If you were a white politician and you wanted to make a stand for the new flag, you had better make certain decisions about your lifestyle thereafter. I recognize that. And I think, Rems, in the ensuing 20 years, the times changed. And people began to understand why it was wrong. The work of Lawrence Stennis, the early work of Philip Gunn, the early work of Black Lives Matter, it all just sort of opened the door for change and made it possible that last 3 weeks in June. I want to say this. Everybody who flew a Stennis flag, everybody who flew a banner that the Mississippi Economic Council developed for its businesses, every person who bought a license tag with the Stennis flag on it, everybody who had a conversation about this, hosted a meal about it, went to a church group gathering about it, all of that participated and contributed to this change dynamic. It really was a 20 years effort at changing the mindset of the state. And it made it possible for that summer to happen. Anybody else? Oh, we're there. Okay. Thank y'all.
It is a fabulous article. If you haven't read it, you can buy a copy of it for $10 back there at the back. Katie, do you want to say a few words? Or you? All right. Thank you all for being here. Come back for Makers Fest on Saturday, and come back next Wednesday to hear Jody Skipper talking about her new book, Behind the Big House. That's a great program that they've been doing for over a decade in North Mississippi, and well worth your time. Thank you all. Help me thank Jere Nash for this fabulous program today.